In retrospect, those people trusted me. They knew I had their back, and they knew I had a plan to help them transition into a new world or a new position.
I like that phrasing that you used. It assumes that they're doing the best they can and that you're guessing there may be something going on and you want to know how you can help. Things escalate, it's not a big deal. It's just what happened. And there's a way forward from that that brings everyone back into peace and into greater alignment. Whether you want more innovation more easily, you are feeling burnt out or overwhelmed, or you simply know that something isn't quite the way you know it can be, you are not alone. I hear the same from leaders every day. On Uncommon Leadership, we explore aligning personal fulfillment with business success, creating authentic teams, and cultivating the resilience necessary to move beyond simply surviving today's challenges into thriving. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams, and today we'll uncover fresh insights into what it means to lead with resilience, adaptability, and ease. Joining me today is Jim Carlough. With over 30 years of leadership experience, Jim is an accomplished business strategist, speaker, and author. Having successfully driven explosive growth for healthcare organizations, from startups to industry leaders, Jim is a trusted expert in building high-performing teams, revitalizing underperforming businesses, and guiding organizations through transformational change. Welcome, Jim.
Michael, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation. When did you first recognize that integrating your whole self, bringing that into everything that you do, might be a valuable approach?
Growing up, I was fairly athletic. So I got very competitive at a young age and knew that in order to compete, you had to not only excel at things, but you had to practice and adapt and do different things to really get by or to play that position over someone else. I was lucky enough to be able to do that through my high school years and then into college. And I think that started the framework for leadership. I know as a youth basketball team I played on once, I served as captain for 1 year, and I had served as captain on a baseball team as well. And so even though that's not necessarily, the leadership stuff that I do today, it did provide some groundwork to that. And that you had to really immerse yourself into what you were doing in order to drive results.
What did you learn on those sports teams that you find still holds true in the teams that you're working with today?
That you can't give up, that you have to keep your focus on the game, or in baseball, on the ball, and giving up is not an option. And if you give up or you don't have the right attitude, you shouldn't show up to play that day, because it's not going to help anyone. And in fact, it would hurt the team. And so I think that's one common things that I walked away from, that even though I may be an individual performer, there were other people relying on me to do things that I was expected to do. And I think that capability and that understanding of that really carried through my life in terms of how I dealt with things or how I became committed or focused on things. At one time, people thought that I was unapproachable because I was so focused. And at times I would be so focused, even walking down the hallway, that somebody would say hello to me and I didn't even recognize that they said hello to me. But I was never unapproachable. And which I found funny when somebody once said that people are afraid of you. They don't think that you're approachable. And I laugh at that, but I can certainly see how that persona was given off.
I understand that level of focus. Growing up, I was infamous in my family for being so focused on the book I was reading that I would not hear them call me to supper. Someone would have to come and pull the book out of my hands for me to recognize that they were talking to me.
Yep.
What helps you recognize today that you don't have the energy to have the level of focus that you need to have that day to accomplish what you want to do to help out the people you're working with?
Those days, thankfully, are few and far between. Another executive that I work with has announced he's retiring. And one of the things he said to me when I told him I was sorry to see him go, his comment to me was, "I'm going to miss working with you. The amount of energy that you have seems to be endless, and it's contagious." But there are days where I think I may be overwhelmed. And it's really funny, Michael. I tend to perform better when I'm overwhelmed than when I have nothing to do. If I'm bored, I then start messing with things that I shouldn't mess with and think that I have to change things that I shouldn't change. So I'm really better, I think, in a I don't want to say in a stressful environment, but really better when I have so much I have to accomplish that I can focus on getting them done as opposed to having my mind wander.
Is part of what fills you up having that sense of overpowering urgency?
No, I think what energizes me is the goal of getting it done. It was sort of like when I got this crazy idea a little over a year ago to write a book. And I thought, how am I ever going to do that? And then when I started it and started the process of framing it out, it sort of energized me to keep going and doing more and more. I look back at the last year and realize how much time it really did take to write. I mean, I'm not a full time author. I had never written a book before, had little guidance. So I was kind of like on a wing and a prayer and putting the effort in. And so I realized that at the end of the day, there would be an accomplishment, and it was a long way down the road. And so I really had to stay focused to get it done. There were days I could knock out 5 or 8 pages, in a matter of minutes because the thoughts were just there. And other days I can sympathize with an author who said some days they just sit at their computer and they stare at a blank screen. I know what that's like because you can't get your mindset into either the story you're telling or the point you want to get across.
So, what's energizing for you about these times where you have an overabundance of work to finish is having an overabundance of things to get done? Is it that simple for you?
I I think so. I think so. There was once in my life I was working for. We had merged a couple of companies together. This goes back to the mid '90s, and after we did that, people started getting assigned new jobs and new roles, and I was told to just sit tight. I had a job, but they weren't ready for me to be moved into that position yet. And I said, "Well, how long will it be?" And they said, "Probably 3 to 4 months." And I said, "You're going to want me to sit around here and be paid what you pay me and do nothing for 3 to 4 months?" And I couldn't fathom that. And I didn't believe them. And I actually believed that I was just on this list of people who weren't set to let go yet. And so when a headhunter called me and said, "Hey, I've got this position. It's sort of right up your alley. You do it today. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yes." And I ended up leaving. And when I went to my boss and I said I was leaving, he said, "Why?" I said, because you don't have a job for me. He said, we do have a job for you. We're just not ready to tell you where or what it is. And I'm like, I can't operate like that. That's, the unknown. And I don't think they really understood me and the fact that I felt I wasn't adding value and that I was probably going to be set to sail off on my own somewhere. And so they said, well, have you given your formal commitment already? I said, I have. And they said, can you unwind it? And I said, probably not. I said, but had you been more forthright, I probably would have found things to keep me busy, but I still would have been bored to death and felt that I owed them something for not adding value and just sitting around. I learned a valuable lesson because I took that new job, and about a year into it, they had a major financial disaster on the horizon, and they laid off 5,000 people, and everyone with less than 2 years of service. And and that put me unemployed. So the organization treated me extremely well, gave me plenty of outplacement services, gave me more severance than they were contracted to. They generally felt bad about the situation. The headhunter that recruited me for that role felt bad and agreed to find me another job, and he did. So I wasn't unemployed, but probably 45 days. But it taught me a valuable lesson that the grass isn't always greener. And it also taught me a lesson that sometimes, even though people may tell you it's okay, it's really my job to dig into that to get the answers I need to feel comfortable and safe to be able to sit around and not do anything. Because my mentality is my DNA does not include sitting around and doing nothing. I mean, even if I'm on vacation at the beach, I'm like you, I read a lot. So I'm reading at the beach. I'm not sleeping. So
Thank you for this great example of so many of the things I talk about all the time. This is, if that first company had known what drives you, what excites you, what keeps you engaged at work, then they would have known, or at least might have been more likely to have the conversation with you. Jim, I know what lights you up is having a set of things to go through. We don't have those set of things for you to go through and accomplish right now. We estimate it's going to be 3 months until we have things for you to do again. In the meantime, we will check in with you every week, and we are looking for other things to do that may be outside your expertise that they can help you give you these things to mark off while we're finding the right thing for you to do. And please let us know how else we can keep you engaged until we have things for you to do again. And on the other side of that, if you had known that this was really important to you and you had felt able to talk with your management about this, then you could have, even if they hadn't offered this conversation to you, you could have instigated that conversation with them and let them know what you needed to stay engaged and trust that they really did have a job for you until the point that they knew what that was.
totally agree. And I think a contributing factor to it was my boss at that time hadn't been my boss. As part of the reorg started, my boss actually got retired, and I ended up reporting to someone who I knew because I helped put some of the I was responsible for part of the reorganization design, and I had met him in that process. And I'm sure he was a champion for me and became my short term boss. But the people that I had reported to for the prior 5 years, they basically retired them all. And, it left me with new people. I had two young children at home at the time that were two under the age of 5, a wife who was working part-time, and a wife who was afraid that this was the end of a career, or a major issue, not a major issue for our marriage, but a major family issue if I was going to be unemployed for a long period of time. Thankfully, none of that happened. But I certainly understand the concern that my wife had, and certainly the concern that I had. But you're right. If that person had known me better, they could have done what I was looking for, and I probably would have been more comfortable telling them what I needed to hear.
It's such a scary situation from so many directions. And it could have been so easily mitigated if your management had just known what to do to help you feel safe.
Absolutely. And, later in my career, I had the opportunity to be on the reverse side of that. And I worked for Perot Systems at the time, Perot as in Ross Perot. And I had a team of people who worked on a product that was old green screen technology. So your leaders who have been around for a few decades like me will understand that green screen was before they had a mouse, and a lot of the younger people won't remember those times or didn't know of those times. But I had to tell this team of people that we were going to be sunsetting the green screen technology because we had developed Windows-based technology. And I struggled for how I was going to approach them. And ultimately, I approached them all as a group, and I made them 3 promises. And I think if I had heard this, I would have felt very, very differently. Promise number 1 was I would tell them the moment I knew that their particular position would be going away because we're taking one of the existing customers and moving them to the new technology. So that notice may be 6 months, it may be 6 weeks, but my commitment was as soon as I knew, they would know. Commitment number 2 was for those people that wanted to stay and migrate to the new platform and technology, I would make available to them training from experts that could train them in the programming language that they would need to support or program in when they transition to those new roles. The third commitment I made was if anyone didn't want to go into that department in those new roles, but wanted to stay with the company, I would help them find a job. And for those individuals who didn't want to stay with the company, I committed to help them find a job on the outside. 2 things happened. The expected happened. The expected was nobody quit before they were told their position was going away because I needed them. And I was thankful that they did. Otherwise, we would have been in a bind to support those customers. Here's what happened that I didn't expect. For a 2 to 3 year period, that team had the highest employee satisfaction rating in the 20-person company. The highest. I never expected that at the time. That wasn't the outcome I was looking for. I was great to have it, but it wasn't what I expected. But in retrospect, those people trusted me. They knew I had their back, and they knew I had a plan to help them transition into a new world or a new position. I think had that happened to me, I probably would have still been with that company for another 10, 15, 20 years.
Yes, I am not surprised. You treated them with respect, told them everything you knew, let them know what you were doing to make the best of that situation, and did everything you could to help them feel valued. About the only thing I can think of that you could have done to even better would be to have personalize that message in the way you gave it to for how each of them worked best and what personalize it to what lights them up so that you could remind them that you understood them at that level and let them know that you were continuing to search for ways to engage what engages them in the situation as is and how you saw it changing going forward. That was a great job, Jim. Well done.
Thank you, sir. It's funny. I do a lot of reflecting, and I was talking to someone a few weeks ago, and they asked me the question: when did you realize you were a good leader? And I actually turned it around. I said, well, let me tell you a different story. Let me tell you when I was a bad leader and how different I am today from when I started out in my first management job, because it truly is a continuum of never ending learning, and you evolve. And the things I did with that group at that point in time, if I was in my first manager role, I would have not had the understanding or the capacity or the empathy to be able to put myself in their shoes.
What has helped you build that empathy?
I think life experiences. I grew up in a family of 5 kids, 2 older, then a 10-year gap, and then a bottom 3, same set of parents. And like everyone, we were not like everyone, but we were a classic middle-class family. There was always food on the table. My dad was a carpenter and then a factory worker. And my mom worked in a local department store when she could. At the age of 8, we lost a brother in the Vietnam War. And that, as tragic as that was, it really showed me not just empathy, but how compassionate people can be, and the outpouring of support from a community that we lived in, which was a tiny town of about 13,000 people. And that caring, I often talk about the town that I grew up in, a small town in New Jersey called Pompton Lakes, and it's in the Patterson area, about 20 miles west of New York City. And to this day, it's such a close-knit community that if you walk down the halls of the high school, there's not a single locker with a lock on it. Can you imagine going into a high school with no locks on lockers and the level of trust you have for your neighbor and they have for you? That is really uncommon. And so as a family, we got to experience that compassion in a very big way. And I think that really helped mold kind of my ability to give back to the community and to others. My family did that as well. My dad was a volunteer fireman. My other brother was a volunteer fireman. And so we were always giving back because we were thankful for what we had, which wasn't a lot. But I think it started in childhood.
How do you build cultures where people feel safe and empowered to bring their unique talents into everything that they do?
So in my leadership philosophy, and I talk about the 6 pillars, the first pillar is integrity. And to me, integrity is non-negotiable. If a leader lacks integrity, or if a leader can't stay in the middle of the road or the middle of the lane and consistently perform and act the same way in similar situations, they will never have they'll have a trust issue with their team. The team will not be a follower. and they'll never be able to get to a performance level that you want to drive them to, because they will always question your authority and your decision making. So to me, integrity is the most important pillar. It's funny, I was talking at a university a few weeks ago, and after talking about integrity, a young woman raised her hand and she said, "Well, shouldn't integrity be the base, like the base of a statue?" And I said, "You're right. I sort of got it all wrong. There's 5 pillars, and there's this big piece of foundation that keeps it all upright." And so if I was to write the book again, that young lady was correct. That pillar is so important. It really needs to be that base structure that then the other 5 pillars are supported upon.
How do you gauge the level of integrity a team has?
Well, there's no simple test to measure integrity other than to watch people and see how they perform. And I watch and I listen, and I'm with them in both good times and in bad, to be able to know who they are, how they react to things, and how to motivate them. And every individual is different. And I think that's one of the things that I question, or one of the reasons I wrote the book that I wrote, was because I saw a commonality in people I was mentoring. They were very intelligent, they knew their trade or their function, but they didn't understand people. And they didn't understand the people aspect of it, the behaviors, the psychological side, the psychological side of it, and how to motivate people and how to get people to respond, respect, and react. And I think that's a differentiator. And if you look at the 6 pillars that I have, all of those lead to things that strengthen that bond between the leader and the team.
Is it then a feeling that you get as you observe these people over time that tells you if where on the integrity scale they are? Or are there also specific signals or behaviors that you are watching for? And the more of those that are missing, the lower the integrity scale is.
There are. So in my management style, besides using the 6 pillars, I do manage by KPIs, and look for performance trends that could dictate a concern or a problem. Someone who's doing 30 tasks a day and all of a sudden drops to 18, something's going on. And so that gives me the opportunity to be able to look at that data and be able to dig down into it to see why. Are tasks taking longer? Is there more timeouts taken or days off taken? And as you start to figure those things out, it puts you in a better position to have the conversation where I could go to you and say, "Michael, I've noticed the effort has kind of dropped off the last 3 weeks. I just want to make sure everything's okay." And start engaging from that and see if the employee will open up, so I can at least try to assist them. I may not be able to solve their problem, but I may be able to assist them, whether it's work related or even at home related, whether it's giving them more time to be with their family, or if someone's got an illness or an issue they're dealing with, how I can help guide them and give them the support that they need.
I like that phrasing that you used. It assumes that they're doing the best they can and that you're guessing there may be something going on and you want to know how you can help, as opposed to, "Hey, Michael, your performance is really dropping. What's going on?" Which sounds very similar. It has a very different, is probably going to be taken in much differently.
I think I would agree with you that my approach produces much more positive results. Now, there are times where I have to have the discussion, Michael, you're not where you need to be. And that is a very different tone and a very different discussion. And so I use my voice effectively, I think, to set the stage for the conversations and what's coming. I also use humor a lot. And when I say humor, I don't mean being a comedian, but being able in a stressful situation to find something that we can at least chuckle about to either break the ice or to get people to be more relaxed, to be able to respond and interact.
Humor can do that really well sometimes. And you mentioned the different forms that your voice takes in the different situations. And I find that to be true also, that mixing and matching the tone that we use, the way we use the instrument of our voice in even the most simplest of conversations, to be not just one, but to bring in multiple of those, tends to make that conversation go more the direction we want to go, to be more engaging for everyone involved. And there's something about that seems to help people feel more safe when they're feeling this complex set of energies in the conversation versus a single monotonic tone.
I totally agree. I remember a time when my first year in management, where someone came into my office literally screaming. And today I wouldn't react this way, but I tended to scream back at them. Not the right thing to do. And today I don't perform that way. But that's the difference between developing the skill set to lead and manage and being thrown into something without a life vest. The person wasn't mad at me. They were mad at a situation, but it didn't warrant me to have my voice escalated. But I definitely agree that the tone that is used has a definite impact on the outcome.
And that example, responding, like yelling in response, could be very effective if it's done in like a humorous way. You come in and say, yelling at the top of your lungs about how angry you are about whatever, or why did I do a certain thing? And if I respond back in also a very loud voice saying, I don't know, Jim, why are you yelling so loud? I can't think this way right now. That could be an interrupt, like you mentioned earlier, that interrupts the situation and turns it down a different path, where if someone is so upset that they are yelling at the top of their lungs, a calm, I don't know, Jim, what's going on, might not even dent into their perception.
That's true. It makes me think of a situation where I had two people that worked together in the same area and reported up to me, and they were in a heated argument on the floor. And I could hear it in my office, which was probably 75 feet away. And I walked over to them, and they were getting escalated. And so I chimed in and yelled, "Whoa," right, with my hands flailing and saying, "What's going on?" And they started, "Well, she's wrong and she's wrong." So I invited them to my office, and they sat down, and I said, "All right, we need to talk through this. You two have never been escalated like that. You have similar personalities, but I need to help you through this." And I forget what I said something humorous, and I don't remember what it was, to try to break the ice. Oh, I said we weren't leaving my office if we had to stay there all night until we resolved this. What was really interesting about the situation is they both were right, but neither one had the complete answer. But the combined answer was completely right. But they were so close to the argument, they couldn't see the forest through the trees. And in a matter of about 15 minutes, I got them to realize that they were both right and that the argument was meaningless, but neither was willing to concede or could see that if they combined their position, it was really the ultimate answer. The response to that was some tears, and I always had a box of tissues on my desk, still do to this day. And so I handed the tissues and I said, okay, but what I don't understand is why the emotion? And the person said to me, because you always do the right thing. And she used her hands like I do when I talk about going down the middle of the road. She said, you're right. We were too close to this and we couldn't see it. And shame on us. I said, no, not shame on you. You just need to, you got escalated and heated and that just got out of control and that became the focal point. What you needed to do was just have somebody come in and not referee, but just calm you down so that we could talk through what you were talking about to get it done. And so we solved it. And it was funny, well, not funny, but those two people never had another argument as long as we worked together, which was a few years more even after that situation. But it's interesting how just being able to get in the middle of that and with some calmness be able to get people to recognize, the forest through the trees and be able to see it and focus.
And something else you did there that was really effective was when they said, you're right, we were doing the wrong thing. You said, no, you're not wrong. You just needed a slight shift in your perspective, where it would have been so easy to say, you're right, you weren't approaching this in the right way. I can only imagine the impact that had on them, and that is almost certainly a significant reason why they had such great relations going forward. And I imagine that really was not just between the two of them, also to everyone else that they interacted with.
Correct.
But you showed them that things escalate. It's not a big deal. It's just what happened. And there's a way forward from that brings everyone back into peace and into greater alignment.
Very true. Very true.
Which is a perfect example of my next question. What is the business value of creating these cultures where people feel safe and empowered?
The business value is higher productivity and higher performance. I have found that if you can use a combination of empathy, compassion, focus, stability as an organization, and even humor, you'll have a more controlled team. And it's not a direct correlation, but when you think about the military, you think about the commander and leading the charge into battle, and the soldiers behind that commander are going to live or die based upon the direction from that leader. Well, what I do, my leadership nobody's going to die under my leadership control. And we're not performing open heart surgery. No offense to any physicians who are listening. And so I have the ability to take the time to break things down into the components so that we can make a collective decision or pathway out of it. And I believe that those teams, have led me to enjoy a much higher productivity level in the organizations that I've served. And I can probably give countless examples of, even that team that they knew their jobs were going away. The performance on that team was unbelievable. The commitment from those people was unbelievable, considering that they knew their job was going away, but they didn't just leave. And so I think that in the people I mentor, I think that's the point I try to get across to them. If you can put yourself in their shoes and humanize all of this and understand the human behavior side of all of this, you'll be far more successful than the leader who's just going to dictate orders. And I don't believe in that. I believe in delegation. I believe in collaboration. I believe in, we're all in this together. And, when we conduct a meeting, and I may have a list of things that I'm going to cover, but that list is things that corporate wants people to be aware of, or things that we're doing, or our financial results. But the rest of it is about them. And my weekly that's a team meeting, and then I have a weekly one-on-one meeting with people, and that's the employee's agenda. That's not my agenda. It's what do they need? What can I do to help them? Where are they struggling? What problems do they have? Where do they need assistance on? And that's their opportunity to tell me where I need to do better to help them.
In addition to productivity, how else does this empathetic helping people bring all of themselves into everything that they do approach? How else does this help further what the business is there to create?
It lowers the attrition rate, increases the productivity, and produces a more fun environment where people are enjoying what they're doing. And they know that if they're not enjoying it, that we'll find a way to get them to do something that they can enjoy. Nobody should be unhappy in work. Nobody should ever feel that I'm in this dead-end job and I'm never going to go anywhere in life. Or maybe you are in a dead-end job, and maybe that's because that's your comfort area and that's where you want to be. And that's okay too. If you said to me, Jim, I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to be a manager. I love what I'm doing. Can I just do this for the next 30 years? Heck yeah. Right? We need people like that. Because you're going to be, in 30 years, you're going to be so good at that, nobody's going to be able to keep up with what you do. So to me, it's a win-win if we can put people in the right roles and not try to take somebody and put a square peg in a round hole where that they don't have the capacity for that position or the capability to succeed in that position. All too often, I see people taking roles or looking at roles where they're not really skilled for, but they think they should apply for or go after, but they know they'd be extremely unhappy if they got that role.
Yes. And as you said, it's not just, I need to do something bigger and better. It is also, not everyone needs to go to the top of the job ladder. And in fact, in every company I've ever been a part of or worked with, the number of jobs decreases the higher up the ladder it goes. So there's no way you can't have a company full of CEOs or
You can't.
Senior vice presidents. If everyone is senior vice president, it's not going to happen. There has to be people at each of those levels. And if we say the only way to be at the lower level is to have a lower level of experience, then this is saying as you gain experience and you don't want to do that higher level job, we don't want to, which seems just a big waste of talent and experience in history. So much more productive.
It is. And and then you find these organizations that get fixated on what they'll call, corporate development programs. and I don't disagree with them, and that's not where I'm going with this, but they try to push training whether people want training or not. And now, if it's presentation skill training, if you have a key punch person doing the same thing every day, but content, happy, and loves what they do, you're not going to make them a presenter of your products and services. So putting them in a PowerPoint class is not going to motivate them. In fact, it's going to demotivate them because they're going to look at that and say, why the heck are they teaching me this? I don't ever want to do that. I mean, there are leaders who want to be out in front, and there's leaders who want to be behind the scenes or behind the curtains. And, either one is okay. There's only going to be one person in front of the curtain potentially, but the supporting cast members are so important to making that a success. They all have a role, and so do the people beneath them.
And yes, I don't know where I was going, so I'll go off in a different direction. How do you help people find their way through all the change, uncertainty, and overwhelm that seems to be what life is these days?
That's where you really have to get to. You really have to know the person and their situation, because every individual is different. And there's some things you can do in a group setting. There's other things that you can't. I can tell the whole group about what we're going to do, but I then have to later come back and talk to Michael and say, Michael, here's how this is going to impact you. And let's talk through whether you have fears or whether you have concerns about the direction that this may be taking, so we can deal and work through those. I think a lot of leaders like to drop the bomb and then run like heck out of the room so that nobody asks them a question or puts them in the corner. And that's not the right way that is absolutely not the right way to do it. Because until you can connect one-on-one and understand, how you receive the message, how you react to that message, and how you're going to deal with that moving forward is so critical. And Michael's different than John and different than Sally. And Sally's different than Sue and George and Bob. And so everyone has to be looked at not just as the whole or the group, but you have to break it down for what it means to you. Because when you leave that day, you're going to say, I got the message, but what's it mean to me? And you can't drop that bomb or that news and not expect questions to come of it. I often wonder about leaders who have a meeting and they don't have a Q&A at the end of it to give people a chance to ask a question. My meetings never end until the questions are exhausted. I may not have all the answers, but I will write down the questions I don't have the answers for, and we'll get them. And I'll commit to a time frame to try to have those answers back. But I think a lot of leaders are just afraid to have that one-on-one discussion.
And keeping in mind that different people will take different amounts of time to process and even to have any questions. Some people, and even the same person, there very likely will be some questions that come up right away in the meeting. Other questions that they'll have after the meeting when they have some time alone or they're able to talk with you one-on-one. And then it's going to be hours or days or later that more questions come up. So it's not even that John is a lots of questions right away person and Michael is a questions a week later person. It's John and Michael are all over probably different points in the spectrum in different ways for different aspects of the bomb that was dropped. Thank you, Jim, for a fabulous conversation today. And thank you, audience, for joining us today. Please let Jim and I know, where are you on your own leadership journey? Even if you're not leading anyone else that you know of, you are leading yourself. Thanks, and have a great day.